we the Jewish people, first of all, we love to do Maswot. But another thing that we really like to do is to pick and choose which Maswot to do and when to do them. The thing that we have to remember is that we maybe want to pick and choose. I like this one better. I like that one not so much. Maybe I'll do them now, but a little later I'm busy. I don't want to do the Maswot or whatever. We have to remember that our enemies in Shamayim and down here work 24/7. Yeah, even Shabbat and Yom Tov. 24/7, they are working to cause problems for us. And what is our way to fight? Our way to fight is the study of the Torah. And the study of Torah, of course, is not just theory. It is for the purpose of doing the Maswot. So our job, therefore, really is to see if we can take on those who are trying to make us stumble, whether above or below, 24/7. You know, it says in the Gemara of Sotah, speaking about when Bnei Yisrael were in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, it says on the pasuk that goes, Haba nithhakema lo. Come, let's be smart, let's outwit them. But really, it doesn't say them, it doesn't say Haba nithhakema lahem, which is them, it says lo, which means him. So the Gemara of Sotah asks, why does it say him and not them, when obviously they're talking about outwitting the Jewish people? Why are they talking about outwitting the Jewish people? Their fear was that Bnei Yisrael were getting so numerous, and eventually they would take over. So they had to deal with them in a very clever manner to avoid this happening. But why does it say him then and not them? And the Gemara tells us because it's talking about their Redeemer, their Goel, the one who is going to come to redeem them, which of course was Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom. We have to deal in a very clever manner with him. They, of course, through their Hartumim and their magicians, their soothsayers, they knew that Moshe Rabbeinu was being born and he was to be the Goel. They also knew various other things. They knew that in the end, Moshe Rabbeinu, his end was, how was his end? Through water. As we know, the whole story of the Mei Meribah, when Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom died, the Torah tells us that the reason for dying is because he struck the rock and didn't speak to it as he was told. Now, why does the Torah say that? And why does it tell us that he did something that seems so unimportant in our eyes? Because the Torah knows how we are, the Jewish people. That had the Torah not said that is the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom is going to die, we would have said, you know why it happened? Because of that terrible thing that he did. What thing? Who knows? But that's how we are. I've seen it with my own eyes. Tzaddikim, righteous people, something goes wrong in their lives, and immediately people start talking, and they say, you know why? Because he did this, he did that, he didn't treat this person nicely, and they're usually, of course, incredibly wrong. So the Torah, in order to avoid that happening, says it's on account of the water from the rock. So they knew that eventually Moshe Rabbeinu would die on account of water. So what did they say? They said his sentence to, in other words, God forbid, get rid of Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom would be through water. And there's another reason for doing that. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be, he swore that he would never again bring a mabul, a great flood on the earth. He did at the time of Noah. He destroyed the earth, except, of course, all those that were in the Teba and in the ark. But God swore, and that's why we have the rainbow, as we know. The rainbow is not like something that we should go and say, oh, look how beautiful, and tell our friends about it. No, quite the contrary. It is a sign from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that if he hadn't made that promise that he would not destroy the world again, the sign of the rainbow is that he would have destroyed the world again with a flood at that time. So it's a great blessing from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he doesn't do it. And people argue that point. They say, no, it's nature, you know, the sun and the water and everything else. Who created nature? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The rainbow is a sign of precisely that. Now, so they say he's going to be destroyed by water, but we know the God of the Israelites, the God of Bnei Yisrael, he's very jealous for them, and it's midah keneged midah. If the enemies of Israel do something to the Jewish people, God does the same thing back. Eye for an eye, in a sense, if you like. So they said, this is smart. If we can get rid of their Redeemer through water, now their God has sworn that he will never again bring a flood. So therefore, he's not going to be able to drown us if we drown him. So it says in Sefer HaKadosh Benayahu, he says that, all right, this is very good and this makes a lot of sense to them. But, however, there are a couple of questions that we have to ask. If they say that God will not bring a flood onto the world, fine. But what about drowning in the sea? God didn't say he's going to remove the sea. God didn't say there's not going to be any pools or lakes or rivers. Indeed, there are plenty of pools, lakes, rivers, and seas. So what was their logic? And he answers, they said as follows, we're smart. We're super smart. We're not going to go into rivers. We're not going to go into lakes. We're not going to go into seas. God is not going to drown us in our land because God has sworn that he will never bring another flood. All right. But there's another question that we have. God said that he wouldn't bring the Mabul again. What was the Mabul? It was the flood that destroyed the world. Nowhere did God say he's not going to bring any flood. We know there are floods. We know that cities get flooded. We know that rivers overflow their banks and create floods. We know that villages get destroyed. As a matter of fact, right about this time, as I speak to you, I was hearing on the radio about areas in the United States that were getting flooded. God never said he wouldn't bring a flood. He simply said he wouldn't bring the great flood, the great Mabul that he brought that destroyed the world. That's problem number one. But problem number two, if they said, we're so smart, we're not going to go into the sea, whatever possessed them. Bnei Yisrael went into the sea and they went right in after them. How do we explain that? So the answer is that their logic was, they knew that the God of the Jewish people was very powerful. And they knew that when he decides to do something, it is done to everybody. Meaning, when God wants to bring retribution or bracha, blessing, which is kilali, which is for the people, it's not that God says, okay, you, and you were bad, so boom, lightning comes down and strikes you down. You were good, so nothing's going to happen to you. You're going to have greater parnasah. It doesn't work like that. We know that when things go well for the world, when financially the world is doing well, both the tzaddikim and the reshaim, both the good and the wicked, all gain, all benefit, and everybody in between. By the same token, we know throughout history, when there was the Spanish Inquisition, when there was the terrible situation in Germany, all these things, there were tzaddikim, righteous people who perished. And people said, why? Because when HaKadosh Baruch Hu finally brings something in general to the people, he doesn't distinguish. So now the Egyptians reasoned that if God splits the sea for the Jewish people, which is what they saw, then they could also go in on dry land. You see, the Egyptians believed in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They believed in his power. They saw it. They saw his outstretched arm. They saw what he did in Mitzrayim. They saw all the miracles. They saw the 10 plagues. And by the way, there were miracles. The splitting of the sea was a miracle, a great miracle. It wasn't like in Purim. The miracles were more hidden. Meaning what? Meaning in Purim, the fact that the king happened that night, he couldn't sleep. The fact that they had written down what Mordechai had done in the Chronicles, and they happened to read the king that portion and so on. These miracles that happened one after another were not individually miracles. It's only when you saw the whole picture and you realize how it unfolded that it was a miracle. Here, it's very clear. It's a miracle. The sea split. They walked through on dry land. But people are saying it wasn't a miracle. They were saying, no, it's the winds that did it. Indeed, it was the winds that did it. The Torah speaks about Ruach Kadim. We know it was winds. But here's the question. How many times in history before that did the winds blow and the sea split? And how many times after that did it happen? So if people don't want to see that it's clearly a miracle in the hand of God, they won't see it. But any normal person will see it right away. And the Misraim, the Egyptians knew it. So their logic was, since God doesn't differentiate when he does something good or something bad, it's to everybody, then if Bnei Yisrael are walking in on dry land, then we too can go in on dry land. And that's what the logic was and why they went in. So when Bnei Yisrael had no choice, they had no choice. They were there right in front of the sea, and the great Egyptian army was running after them, and there was a sea in front of them, and they're all crying out to God and shouting and screaming and praying, and Moshe Rabbeinu, and God says, Matis Achelai, why are you shouting at me? Now's not the time to pray. There's a time for everything. Now's the time to go and act. Go into the water, and we know Nachshon ben Aminadab went in, and when the water was up to his nose, basically, the sea split. But the problem was, God created the world. God makes the rules. God can make the exceptions to the rules. So in this case, God said, I know that what I do for one, I do for the other, but not in this case. In this case, my people are going to go through dry land, but the Egyptians are going to get drowned. And that's why it says, "Vayamsuf lahem bachata," you split the Red Sea for them, "Vezedim tebata," and the bad people, basically, you drowned, "Vedidim abruyam." But your beloved people, the Jewish people, were able to go through on dry land. So we see that God simultaneously, at the same time, meted out punishment to the Egyptians and blessing to the Jewish people. So what does God want? This is an example of how God does good for the Jewish people. But what does he want in return? Let's be honest, we understand the concept. I'm doing something for you, but you need to do something for me in return. So basically, he says very simply, he wants us to be his people. Tiuli le'am. He wants us to be his people. He redeemed us. He took us out of Egypt to give us the Torah. Why? Because he wants us to be his people. So to be his people means we have to do what he asks of us. So when we accepted the Torah at Har Sinai, we know the whole story that we know the story about Naaseh v'Nishma. We were the only nation who said we will do it. Then we'll hear what's in there. We also know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu lifted the mountain on top of us and said, this is going to be a graveyard, the hollowed out mountain. If you don't accept the Torah, it's going to come down on top of you. By the way, there's a question about that. People ask, we don't understand. God heard us say we'll accept the Torah. Now, why is God threatening us? There are a lot of explanations for that. But one of them that I'd like to mention now is because we accepted the Torah Shebechtav, the written law. God made us, forced us to accept the oral law, Shebe'al Peh. And there's a reason for that, but it's not for today. We'll talk about it maybe on another occasion as to why it was to our benefit that God had to force us to do it and we didn't openly, willingly accept it. When I say that we have to follow on the path of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what it means is at all times, 24/7, including Shabbat and Yom Tov, just as our enemies are doing. The temptation that you see with people is to do the Maswot when they're at home is easier. How many times have you heard people say, I keep kosher at home, but when I go out, it's too difficult. I don't do it. That's a big problem. And it's not just to that extent, but even people who are more particular when they say at home, even to go to Beit Knesset and so on, when they're traveling, it's more of an effort. They don't know the roads as well. They don't know the synagogues, the people as well. So they decide that they'll weaken a little in their performance of the Maswot. I want to tell you a story about Rav Mordechai Eliyahu alav shalom. Rav Mordechai Eliyahu is, of course, the Rishon LeZion and chief rabbi of Israel. And he tells a story about, I guess he was younger, and his children, who are now, very important Rabbanim in their own right, were small. And they went to the seashore. I don't know where it was, he doesn't say, but they went to the seashore. And as they were sitting there, he said he saw another man. Looks certainly religious. He had a long beard, he had peot, he's wearing talit katan, the whole works. He sat down with his children to eat. And I guess he had a bag and he pulled out sandwiches or something. Obviously it was something with bread because it required nitilat yadayim, the washing, ritual washing of hands. Rav Mordechai Eliyahu sees that he just takes the bread out, the food out, and they're eating without nitilat yadayim. Now, it's a difficult question to know when to speak to a person and when not. I myself have had the experience that when you say, it's my duty, my obligation to go over and say something to someone, that you've regretted saying it because the guy turns around, gets furious, and everything became worse. So it's always a very delicate situation. We're supposed to tell our neighbor when he's doing something wrong, but not when it's going to make it worse. So one has to make that judgment. So he was looking at the situation, and he said, you know what? If I don't say something, then his children are going to learn from his actions, and that's very bad. So he went over to the man and he said, can I ask you why you didn't do netilat yadayim? The man says, we're at the seashore. And Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu says to him, and God is not at the seashore? Says the guy heard the musar, he heard that he was being scolded a little bit. He told his children, here, take the keli and fill it up with water so we can do netilat yadayim. Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu says to him, stop, that's not going to help. Those of you who follow the Torah Minute at torahminute.com that we do, I had done one on this subject as to how the salt water in the sea is so salty that it's considered that it's nifsal, it's become no good, l'achilat keleb. Even a dog wouldn't drink that water. It is so salty. When something is so salty or so bad that a dog wouldn't consume it, we cannot use it for netilat yadayim. So he says that doesn't work. He says, so what do I do? He says, what you do is you have to go and do tebilah of your hands. You have to put your hands in the ocean, like you can do tebilah of a person in the ocean, so too you can dip your hands in the ocean. That brings a different problem of what bracha do you say. Ashkenazim, some of them say, you have to say, al tebilat yadayim. Sephardim say, the Ben Ish Hai says, you say regularly, al netilat yadayim. But that's a secondary point. Just by the way, as a point of interest, if it ever happens to you, if you boil the water, even though we wouldn't want to drink it, they say a dog would, so then if it's been boiled, you can use it for netilat yadayim. But that's a side point. So what we see here is that there is this tendency that we have to pick and choose, number one, the maswot that we do, and also pick and choose when it is that we do them and where it is. We can't do that. God is everywhere. As he asked the man, you want to tell me God is not at the seashore? He's everywhere, wherever we go. So we have to be on our guard because the enemies, just like the Egyptians' own ministers and sarim, were always looking to make us trip up and fall and stumble. They're working, as I say, 24/7 to do their job. So we have to be on the alert 24/7. And hopefully for the zechut of that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bring us to come in. Mashiach Tzidkenu, may it come b'merav b'yameinu, v'chen yirasonu, amen.